Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, as of 19th of January 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So I did mention yesterday that there would be an all-core devs call happening today, basically, or yesterday, basically, and it happened, and Tim Biko put out a tweet thread about it. Now, of course, I also mentioned on yesterday's episode that on this call they would discuss if there were any kind of delays to the testnet forks for Dencun because of the little bug that we had on the girly fork, and I'm very, very happy that there isn't a delay. Like I mentioned yesterday, there was a very low chance that there'd be a delay, and Tim says here in the thread that the testnet forks for Dencun, Sepolia and Holsky will go ahead as planned on Jan 30th for Sepolia and Holsky on Feb 7th then. And we can expect an announcement with client releases next week. Of course, after those testnet forks go through, we'll then get an announcement for a mainnet date, which I still expect to be mid to late March. So it was great to see that all of that, everything that happened on Girly didn't delay anything as expected, which is great there. And then the all-core devs also discussed a few other things in relation to Dencun, but then moved on to a bunch of other stuff as well, which you can kind of read the thread to get a view into here. They are definitely, firmly moved over to, I guess, discussing the Prague and Electra AIPs at this stage. Really, it's just kind of a little bit of discussion over Dencun now because of the fact that Dencun is just on the test nets. There's no more kind of, obviously, research into the AIPs. There's no more real clients, things for clients to do, unless it's a bug or a performance improvement. So really, they're kind of moving all towards the Prague and Electra EIPs. And as I discussed, or I've been discussing over the last few days, there are a lot of EIPs slated for that upgrade, or at least proposed for that upgrade. So really, the next few months, you're just going to be working through the motions of which ones will actually make it into. I'm going to start calling it Petra, just because saying Prague and Electra is longer than saying Petra. We're going to, have a discussion about which ones are actually going to make it into Petra, and then go through the motions that we always do leading into an Ethereum network upgrade. As you guys know, I'm most excited about things like the max effective validator increase, but also with execution layer triggerable exits for validators to make permissionless staking a reality, because right now, even in the most permissionless staking ecosystem rocket pool, there is still reliance on the ODAO, because the ODAO needs to process validator withdrawals and needs to actually process removing validators that are offline for long periods of time and stuff like that, whereas in a fully permissionless system, you could trigger these exits from the execution layer without having to go through any kind of like Oracle DAO or any kind of like, I guess, centralization vector, which is obviously really, really good for permissionless staking on Ethereum. But anyway, you can go give Tim's tweet thread a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. Alright, so I've been talking a bit about this on the Refuel lately, and it's been a topic of discussion within the Ethereum community for at least a couple of weeks now, but I guess much longer than that generally, but it's all about the Ethereum gas limit, right, which is effectively Ethereum's block size. Now, Parathosh has put out a new research post about the potential testing path to figure out gas limit increases. Now, I did mention this the other day, saying that if we want to actually seriously think about increasing the gas limit, we have to know what the trade-offs are. We have to know what the effects on the network are going to be. We have to know basically how much we can increase it by, what we're getting out of it, stuff like that. And that's exactly what Parathosh is trying to do here. He's getting the conversation started, trying to put together basically a framework for this. Now, there were a few replies already on his posts, one from Micah Zoltu here, who's been quite active in the Ethereum core dev and research space for quite a while now, but basically he has like this 7-point list here of who we should be optimizing for being able to run a node. And basically he starts off with number one saying, should we be optimizing for someone with a 10-year-old flip phone being able to run a full node, and then going all the way to number 7, which is someone with a data center. So there's basically a spectrum here of where you can run a full node, and he basically comes to the conclusion that Ethereum should be optimizing for numbers 3 to 6, which is someone with a consumer daily driver laptop, someone with a gaming rig, someone with a low-cost dedicated server in their home, and someone with a dedicated server in a data center. Because the top two here, someone with a 10-year-old flip phone and someone with a high-end cell phone and great network connectivity, are probably not what Ethereum is kind of going for at this stage. And he mentions there's also blockchains out there that can target this, the fully ZK blockchains, and maybe eventually Ethereum becomes a fully ZK blockchain. But in the, I guess, like probably even the longer term, like I don't expect Ethereum to be kind of snarkified probably for like 10 years at this stage. So if we're talking over the next 5 to 10 years, we're probably going to be targeting that 3 to 6 there. And even, I mean, in 7, like you can run Ethereum full nodes in a data center, but it's more about kind of what the minimum requirement is. And the minimum would be, maybe just a daily driver laptop or even below that, right? Like a daily driver laptop, I guess that's a broad thing to define as well, because there are different types of laptops out there, ranging from, your $100 laptop all the way to your many thousands of dollars laptops. And people use these as their daily drivers, right? And then there are gaming rigs which can cost even more, whether they be gaming PCs or gaming laptops. So I think that if we're talking about the hardware that we can run full nodes on today, probably the cheapest you can do it on with a 2 terabyte solid state drive. So you'd probably go like a Raspberry Pi with a 2 terabyte solid state drive. You're probably looking at $400 to $500, and it really depends on where you are in the world, of course, because the components will cost different things, and then you'll have to factor in your internet cost and your electricity cost as well. But if we're talking about just pure hardware cost, you could probably get it done for $400 at this point, depending on what SSD you buy. Obviously, the different brands offer different price points depending on if you get a good deal. So I guess it's safe to say around $400 there. And you can get laptops for that amount as well, and they can probably run Ethereum full nodes. But I like to look at Raspberry Pis and these kind of dedicated devices that you can install Linux on and basically do whatever you want with them and have them. And they're a small footprint as well. A laptop has a screen attached to it, right? So it's going to take up more space. It has a keyboard and everything. Whereas a Raspberry Pi is very, very small. Even in a case, it's absolutely tiny. So that is kind of what I look at when I look at the most low-powered hardware that we can run an Ethereum full node on. Now, will that always be the case? That's a question that people come up with. Like, will that always be the case with all the upgrades that are coming to Ethereum, with the fact that we have effectively increased the gas limit because we've added 4844, which for a period of time, obviously blobs expire, but for a period of time, it increases the, bandwidth requirements and the storage requirements for full nodes and the general overhead of the network. But then, if we decrease the gas limit, if we double the gas limit, as I mentioned the other day, that automatically doubles the kind of load on the network, automatically doubles the chain size. And not straight away. Obviously, it's not going to double the chain size based on history, but it doubles it from there. So, for example, if the chain is growing a terabyte per year, which I think it's much less than that, but for argument's sake, let's say the chain is growing 1 terabyte per year. If we double the gas limit, then you would expect, as long as we're using all of that gas, right? It does require the network to be at capacity at all times, which Ethereum is. So let's assume it's at capacity. It would mean that you're using the chain is growing at 2 terabyte per year from that point onwards. So it's all about kind of optimizing for, I guess deciding what hardware we want to optimize for, and then raising gas limits around that. So yeah, I was glad that Micah brought this up, because it's definitely a critical point. I mean, it's the whole reason that Ethereum is built the way it is, right? Ethereum layer 1 being the settlement layer, Ethereum layer 2 is being the scalability layer. There's no point increasing requirements for Ethereum L1 to the point where we basically kick off things like Raspberry Pis on the network, kick off low-power devices off the network, because in that world, we just get closer and closer to the monolithic kind of design, which is not what Ethereum wants to optimize for. And of course, there are other upgrades that play into this, such as Verkle trees and statelessness and state expiry, which can potentially allow us to increase the gas limit without actually putting an additional burden on the network. So those are, I guess, orthogonal discussions to this. This is more for like increasing the gas limit in the current state of things, not with Verkle trees enabled. But I guess like when those things come along, it's a different calculus again. So anyway, you can go read this post for yourself to get a feel for this, and also read the replies here. I'll link that in the YouTube description below. But this is definitely a discussion that I think that if you're a solo staker, if you're a full node operator, if you're doing anything with Ethereum, I guess like software and running your own hardware and stuff like that, you should definitely read this and have a say. Because I think that for me personally, I would be really sad if my Rock 5B board was kicked off the network because we increased the gas limit for, as I've argued before, not really much benefit, because essentially you would just fill that capacity pretty quickly, and then you've increased the overhead on the network by a huge amount if you double the gas limit for very little gain. That's my general view on it. But still, we want to test it. We want to do it, we want to get empirical evidence. We don't want to just base it on vibes and feelings, right? So that's what Parathosh is trying to do here, and a bunch of other people within the community. So you can go check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so Shriram put out a great tweet thread today, basically comparing Sidechains versus Optimiums versus Anytrust chains versus Validiums. And this tweet I'll link in the YouTube description below, but Snowsledge also quote tweeted this with a nice little summary of Shriram's post here, which is basically comparing Sidechains to Optimiums to Anytrust chains to Validiums based on the ledger growth, the censorship resistance, data availability, reorg resistance, and validity. So it's all about kind of trade-offs again here, and it's all about different trust assumptions here. Any trust chains are something that Arbitrum came up with. Optimiums are basically Validiums, but using optimistic rollups instead. And Validiums, Starkware, I believe, initially came up with this. And you guys know that basically Validiums and Optimiums and any trust chains all basically store their data off-chain. They don't store it on Ethereum L1. And sidechains are a thing that's been around for a very long time now, actually. And people will argue that you can consider anything a sidechain to anything. So, for example, you could consider Bitcoin a sidechain to Ethereum, like if you have a bridge between them. And the thing is, though, is that like there's different bridge constructions as well, and it's kind of hard to argue that Bitcoin is a sidechain to Ethereum because maybe there's a bridge to Bitcoin via a centralized exchange. Because technically, you can bridge to Bitcoin via a centralized exchange, right? You can basically send your this is very convoluted, but like this is an argument people make. Let's say you send ETH from Ethereum to a centralized exchange. You're still on the Ethereum network, obviously. Then you swap that ETH for BTC, and then you withdraw that BTC to the Bitcoin network. Some people argue that that is you bridging to Bitcoin, and I'm like, I don't really buy that argument. I don't really kind of vibe with that argument. But then people argue, well, okay, what about bridging via something like Thorchain? What about bridging via wrapped Bitcoin, for example, going from the Bitcoin chain, wrapping your BTC, and they're going to Ethereum. Wrapped Bitcoin is very centralized. Thorchain has its own trust assumptions because it has its own validator set that manages all of that, right? So there are different kind of trust assumptions here of those sorts of things. And sidechains generally are regarded as not inheriting any security from the base layer, essentially, or basically inheriting anything from the, I shouldn't say base layer, but from the layer that it's considered a sidechain to. So, for example, the most popular sidechain in Ethereum, the Ethereum ecosystem, is probably the Polygon POS chain, which does want to become a Validium ZK EVM eventually, but right now it still exists as a sidechain. It does checkpoint itself to Ethereum L1, but that's not going to give it, that's not going to make it kind of like an L2. It's not going to give it the same guarantees as an L2. It's not going to give it the same guarantees as a rollup or anything like that, because the Polygon POS chain has its own consensus, has its own validator set. It is not reliant on Ethereum, like totally reliant on Ethereum for those sorts of things. I know that the staking is done via Ethereum, and there's kind of, I guess, like a hybrid model going on there, but ultimately it's secured by the POS chain validators. That's kind of how it works there. Whereas something like a Validium is very different, because a Validium, even though it's not storing its data on Ethereum L1, it is still not using its own consensus mechanism. It's not using its own validator set. It is inheriting that from Ethereum L1 because it's posting its proofs there, right? And it's basically got its bridge on there as well, so to bridge assets in and out. Same for things like Optimiums and any trust chains, but they have even different trust assumptions here. So that's exactly what Shriram's thread goes through, and I'll link it, as I said, in the YouTube description below, but you've also got this table to reference as well. And I think it's great to be on top of this stuff and to actually understand basically what the trade-offs are here. At the end of the day, the most secure L2 construction is going to be a rollup always, because a rollup is considered to store both its proofs and its data on the same layer. It doesn't have to be Ethereum L1, but obviously, I mean, most, if not all of the L2s today, or all the rollups are on Ethereum L1, but that is the top security. That is the top security from the proof perspective and from the bridge perspective, but also from the fact that your data is highly available and highly secure on Ethereum L1 versus some off-chain data availability network or data availability committee or any such thing like that. But still, a Validium is much better than a sidechain because of the fact that it is still a one-of-n trust assumption. Their Validiums can actually be built as hybrids, where essentially you could potentially download the data yourself, install the data yourself, and then be able to recreate it if you can't get it from anywhere else. So there are just different types here. And of course, L2Beat, L2Beat's website has everything on this, like has all the information you need on this and breaks it down for you. So you can go visit the L2Beat website as well on this. But yeah, I just thought it was something interesting to bring up for you guys to go check out, which I'll link in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so Nethermind has announced that Nethermind Research, in collaboration with 4 Pillars, has introduced a framework for evaluating security measures and Eigenlayer restaking strategies in shared sequences. Inside the report, they cover technical nuances of sequences like Espresso, Astria, and Aztec Fernet, an analysis of the cost-profit dynamics in validator corruption and its impact on security, a review of sequencer attack types centering on the most threatening ones, and strategies for optimizing risk-adjusted returns, including slashing mechanisms and dynamic reward models. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this, and you can go download this for yourself, it is a file that's linked here an Adobe Adobe file 40-page report, and it's free to check out here. But the reason I'm talking about this is because there's been a lot of talk lately about Eigenlayer generally and the risks of Eigenlayer, the risks of the Eigenlayer AVSs, and understanding those risks and breaking them down and essentially having a comprehensive overview of them. Well, that's exactly what Nethermind has done here. This is, as I said, a 40-page report going through how shared sequences would work in the outside the context of Eigenlayer, and then also within the context of Eigenlayer as an AVS. So if you want to go check this out, you can. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But this is exactly the stuff that we want to be seeing, and this is why I think that a lot of the risks and concerns about Eigenlayer are really overblown, because the Ethereum community has always prided itself on making sure that those risks and concerns are very public, and also doing the research to understand them on a deep level. We don't tend to sweep things under the rug, for better or worse, right? Sometimes it kind of comes and bites us on the ass because we're a bit too honest about things, and then people use it as FUD. But I'd rather we be too honest about things, and people use it as FUD than not do any research at all and just kind of bury our heads in the sand, because there's been plenty of other ecosystems over the years that have done this. I think one of the greatest examples of this is the Terra ecosystem. Many people were telling the Terra ecosystem, hey, what you're building with the UST stablecoin with Anchor is a Ponzi, and it's going to unwind and collapse. Like, the design was not a secret. Everyone could read the white paper, and if you understood the way the design worked, you understood that it would death spiral. And of course, it did death spiral. We saw that play out, and it happened very, very quickly within 3 days. But because everyone was drunk on the Moon Boy Kool-Aid, essentially, everyone was drunk on the Luna token going up, everyone was drunk on those 20% yields that Anchor was offering, and a lot of big players got involved with it too. This wasn't just normal retail guys. This was a lot of big players within the ecosystem. I mean, even the biggest players that ended up going bankrupt, like 3 Arrows Capital, Celsius, FTX, right, and SBF and all that, they were involved in this stuff. And because of that, because there was no real interest in being intellectually honest and doing deep research here, what ended up happening is that you had basically people burying their heads in the sand and things blowing up, and then a lot of people get hurt. And the worst thing about Terra was the fact that people went into the UST stablecoin thinking that it was somewhere safe to be, because they're like, oh, it's a stablecoin, right? But no, not all stablecoins are created equal. There are different risk profiles for different stablecoins, and that was just not made apparent because everyone was drunk on the Kool-Aid. Whereas within the Ethereum ecosystem, there has been stuff like this before, I think, like specifically within DeFi Summer, there was a lot of this, but it was very contained back then, and I think the Ethereum community learned from that and basically said, okay, well, let's not repeat that. Let's make sure that we call out the risks as we see them, we do deep research on them, we talk about them openly, and it's not just within the context of restaking, it's also in the context of client diversity, it's in the context of validators, market share, like Lido, for example, having a big market share on the network, what the implications of that are. It's in the context of L2s. I mean, L2Beat does a lot of great work around this, and now obviously we have teams like Nethermind looking at restaking, looking at things like shared sequences, looking at AVSs, and that sort of stuff is honestly one of my bull cases for Ethereum. The fact that we are so transparent and we are so kind of interested in getting to the bottom of things and outlining all those risks and making sure that we're aware of them, that to me is a massive strength of the Ethereum ecosystem that really, I think that any other, there are other ecosystems that do take security and kind of research into it seriously. But I think that in terms of like the amount of stuff going on in Ethereum and the amount of stuff that we have to keep track of and we have to do research on, especially because Ethereum is at the forefront of a lot of things, like MEV, for example. All networks will suffer from MEV, but because Ethereum is at the forefront, it's had to deal with those problems first and head on and have to come up with solutions to them. Yeah, I just think Ethereum is way ahead in that regard. But yeah, anyway, enough of my rambling here. You can go read this report for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so MetaMask announced today something called a validator staking on MetaMask portfolio. So with a 32 ETH deposit, rerun your very own validator node where you're always in control. No pooling, no hardware, just rewards. So MetaMask is using consensus staking to do this, where essentially you can just deposit 32 ETH with them. They'll run the validator, they'll manage all the node operation, but you're always in control, and there's no pooling, there's no hardware requirements, and there's just rewards to you. So if you're someone who has 32 ETH and you don't want to go through the hassle of setting up your own validator, and you also don't want to put that into something like Lido or any other of those services out there, then this may be an option for you. Honestly, I feel like the market for this is relatively small, because if you have 32 ETH, like I would hope that, and you want to run a validator, I would hope that you'd be doing it on your own, honestly, because the main barrier to entry in that I believe within solo staking is that 32 ETH capital requirement, because as I mentioned before, the hardware requirements are very low, and the cost is very low. So and the technical requirements, as much as people like to talk about them being super complex, at the end of the day, if you have 32 ETH and you want to solo stake it, I think it's worth it to go through that. And at the end of the day, like the people that say that it's too complex and too technical, well, most of them aren't even going to have 32 ETH to begin with, so they don't even have to worry about it. And maybe that requirement goes down over time, but as I've mentioned to you guys before, let's say we drop it to 16 ETH today, and the ETH price, maybe not today, let's say we plan to drop it to 16 ETH in like 6 months, and the ETH price doubles in 6 months, then we're back to square one dollar-wise. Like, it doesn't really make a real lasting difference if we expect ETH to go up in value over time. So really, if you have less than 32 ETH, the next best solution obviously is permissionless pooled staking, and there's a lot of solutions out for that, like LSTs and LRTs. There's a lot of those out today, so you're spoiled for choice there. But in terms of like pure solo staking, and I'm talking like pure solo staking here, not staking with something like Rocket Pool, which is obviously not pure solo staking, right? There are still various different risks there, and it's a different mechanism altogether. But if we're talking about pure solo staking, then obviously you still need 32 ETH, which is a lot of money, right? I mean, off the top of my head, what is it? It's 70,000 US dollars, I think, if I'm doing my math correctly there, or maybe a bit less than that, 65,000 US dollars or something. Regardless, that is like a ton of money for the vast majority of people in the world. That's like, I would say 99.9% of people do not have that just lying around to buy ETH with. Maybe they have that somewhere else in some other assets, but if we're talking about a spare money to buy ETH with, no, most people don't have that. So that is always going to be the main barrier to entry to pure solo staking. And as I've talked about in the past, if you want to bring that barrier down, there are so many different considerations to that, but the biggest being the fact that we can cut it in half, and then ETH price doubles and we're back to square one. So really the better solution for people with less than 32 ETH, or less than the minimum, whatever the minimum ends up being down the line, is to just have pooled staking, permissionless pooled staking, and also doing things like squad staking with Obol, for example, where essentially you can have you can run your own validator, you can run your own nodes, and you only need to put up 3.2 ETH, because it's if you do it with 9 other people, you at minimum it's only 3.2 ETH, so it's a much less of a capital requirement than it is for 32 ETH. And I actually would consider Obol in its like final decentralized form to be the closest thing, like Obol squad staking, I should say, to be the closest thing you could get to pure solo staking, because you're still running the validators, you're still running the full node yourself, you're just sharing the load with others out there. But so it's not obviously the same as solo staking like 100%, but it like gets you 99% of the way there. And I'm hoping other designs follow that as well, like Rocket Pool, for example. I hope that follows that over time. I think what stops people from staking with Rocket Pool is obviously the fact that there's also an RPL requirement to put up for it, and also it's still quite high. I mean, 8 ETH plus the whatever it is, 2.4 ETH worth of RPL or something. That's still a pretty big capital requirement. But then there are other solutions as well coming online to help with that too. So a lot of competition there, a lot of stuff happening there. But MetaMask just joins the fray here with a rather unique solution for people. All right, some big news out of the Arbitrum ecosystem today. So they put out a tweet where they said, Arbitrum Orbit continues to enhance customization, empowering projects to tailor their solutions to specific requirements. Today, we introduced an Arbitrum Audit expansion program, allowing you to have a self-service path to launch custom Orbit chains, L2s or L3s that settle to Ethereum. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this was not because they've obviously done this huge update today, but because of the way that they've done it. So you may be looking at this and thinking, okay, well, I can launch an Orbit chain and settle down to as an L3 and settle down to Arbitrum 1 and then settle down to Ethereum. You can do that, but also you can actually do this on any L2. So they say here, Orbit chains are granted the right to make customized L2s or L3s that settle to Ethereum directly, or other Ethereum L2s such as optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, Optimiums, and Validiums. So essentially, you can build these chains on any L2. You can build an Arbitrum Orbit chain on an Optimism, on OP mainnet, for example, as an L3. Like, how cool is that? This is kind of a synergistic approach from the Arbitrum ecosystem here. It's not a monopolistic approach, which I really love to see. And then you can see here they continue. A portion of the profit sharing will go to a newly established Arbitrum Developer Guild, which will help fund Arbitrum core development, and L3s that settle to Arbitrum 1 and Nova are already covered by the existing permissionless path and don't need to contribute revenue back. So essentially, as I said, you can use these on other L2s, but you will have to contribute something back to Arbitrum. It's not like a free lunch. You don't just get to deploy these things on on OP mainnet, for example, or on other L2s, for example, and then not contribute anything back to the Arbitrum ecosystem, there is still a kind of profit sharing agreement in place there, which I think is completely fine, because at the end of the day, if you're using Arbitrum's technology, you're relying on the Arbitrum ecosystem to continue to develop and maintain that technology, so you should fund that. And this is a really great way to do it, by doing this profit sharing. And there's been a few DeFi apps that have done this before. I know Curve basically gave permission to people to fork their app onto other chains, but then contribute back a percentage of the revenue to the Curve ecosystem for that, for that basically. It's basically a way to ensure that Curve gets something out of it, so to speak, rather than just being like a vampire or vampiric kind of attack on the protocol there. So yeah, just a very, very cool announcement out of the Arbitrum ecosystem today. And you can also see a nice little graphic here of the Orbit chain hierarchy. So you can have like Orbit L3 sitting at the top here, settling down to an Ethereum L2, any Ethereum L2, or Arbitrum 1, an Arbitrum Nova, or an Orbit L2 as well. And then ultimately it all settles down to Ethereum L1. And this is what I mean by obviously Ethereum being the settlement layer. Like Ethereum L1 is the ultimate settlement layer here. Even though there's an L3 at the top, settling down to an L2, but then it settles down to L1. So L1 is always the ultimate settlement layer. So really great to see this, but you can go read the post. I think there's a blog post here from Arbitrum 1. Is there a blog post? I'm not sure. I hate the way Twitter does links here, but there is a little bit more information in the tweet thread. I'll link this in the YouTube description below for you to go check out. All right, so L2Beat has added a new page to their website called the Finality page. Now you can see the average time it takes for an L2 transaction to be finalized on the L1. This has been a long time coming. I've wanted to see this for a long time actually on the L2Beat website, and it's really great to see that they've started putting this out there. Now, of course, not every L2 is supported here. You can see here that they've got 6 that they currently support, including OP, mainnet, and base. And then you can see they list what type of L2 this is, the DA mode, so what DA mode it's currently in, and the 30-day average time to finality. And you can see here that for OP mainnet, it's 48 seconds plus L1 finality. So basically, it's assumed that the transaction data batches are submitted sequentially, and the maximum time is 7 minutes plus L1 kind of finality here. And there's also a note here that says, please note the values on the page reflect the time required to achieve ordering finality, at which point transactions cannot be reverted or reordered. For simplicity, they did not include the overhead time to reach L1 finality, which is the same for all projects, around 13 minutes under good network conditions. And what this means is that Ethereum finality happens around 13 minutes, right? After 2 epochs. So that is, you have the L2 finality, and then you have L1 finality on top of that. Now, in a world where you have basically single slot finality, it would essentially mean that the L2 gets finality at the same time gets L1 finality at the same time that it gets L2 finality, because single slot finality means that finality happens per block. So if you're submitting a batch in the block, then finality has happened in that block and it's completely finalized, can't be reverted there. So it's really, really great to see that they've got this page out there, and I'm sure they're going to keep updating it here. But L2Beat just continue to kill it with the transparency that they're bringing to the L2 ecosystem. So you can go check this out for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, last up here, I just wanted to announce that Nifty Island open beta is now live. Now, I spoke about Nifty Island a little while ago, and I did mention to you guys that I thought that this was really cool that they continued building during the bear market. They've been around for quite a while now. They'd been quiet for quite a while, but you can now go to niftyisland.com and start playing. I did manage to play around with it a little bit. There are bugs. I believe my game client crashed because I was just searching for something in my inventory, and I haven't gone back since then. I just have too many other things to do right now. I've still got my little ETH phone that I got recently. Actually, I've got this ETH OS phone. It's a Pixel 7 that runs a custom kind of Android on it, that has things like a light node on. You can actually see, I don't know if it's actually mirrored. I was going to do a proper video on it, but it's got like a light node on it. It's got like a wallet on it. But yeah, I still haven't had time to play around with that. It's just sitting on my desk here. But I did play around with Nifty Island a little bit. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool what you can do. You can like terraform your own island, add items to it. It runs quite smoothly, and it's not too demanding on a PC here. But you can play it in browser or desktop mode on Windows and Mac. So you can go check that out for yourself. And they've been teasing this kind of airdrop that they're doing as well. This play to airdrop thing that they're doing. They are going to do a token. So if you're into that, you can go check that out for yourself. But yeah, just wanted to remind you guys that it is now live, the open beta, and it is an open beta, which means that there are going to be bugs. So if there are bugs, be sure to report them to the team so that they know and they can fix them. But yeah, go check that out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. But I think on that note, that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all next week. Thanks, everyone.